It's recorded.
There you go.
Okay, let's call to order the meeting of the Green Bay Traffic, Bicycle, and Pedestrian Commission for Monday, June 17th, 2019. We'll go to item A, roll call. All present.
All are present.
We don't need to do a formal who's who, do we?
No,
Okay.
we're logged in via Civic Clerk.
Okay, all right.
They just
Move on to B, approval of the agenda. Approval of Monday, June 17th, 2019 Traffic, Bicycle, and Pedestrian Commission meeting agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I would move B and C.
Okay, motion made for B and C.
Second.
Motion made, seconded.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. D, regular business, modification of 90-day trial, consideration with possible action on request from Elements Canal to establish a no parking zone on both sides of Broman Street from Elmore Street to Mather Street.
We're only about 1 month into the trial, so about a third into it, and during this time, I've received some emails from the alder who's present tonight, basically complaining about the zone being installed, and that sounds like there may be some sort of compromise that instead of having both sides being restricted, that the residents would be okay with one side being restricted. And at this time, it looks that the east side would be the more preferable side to keep it restricted, and the west side to have the signs removed. So, and looking at this, I know we do have a narrow street, but it also is a very low traffic volume street. And if you regulate it on one side, I mean, if you have 100 vehicles on that street, I'd be surprised per day. I would think that it'd be pretty most self-regulating. You know, you're not going to have that situation where you're going past a parked car and two-way traffic at the same time. It's that low. So, based off of that and what we're hearing from the residents, I don't see an issue with that. So I'd say my recommendation would be to, technically what we need to do is rescind the current 90-day trial, and then basically have a new motion for establishing a no parking zone on the east side of Roman Street from Elmore to Mather. And then we can modify the length of that, so it still emulates a 90-day trial. So since we're technically about 30 days in, we'll just say a 30-day or a 60-day trial. That's the staff recommendation. I know we have the alder here and someone in the gallery to speak on the item.
Yeah. District 7, Randy Scannell. I have went and I've knocked a lot of doors since this happened, and the residents would like some parking on the street. It's a hardship for a lot of them. A lot of them have they're multi-families. Many people living in one residence, and there's 2-3 cars, and to be able to use some parking on the street, even just for 10 minutes to jockey the cars around. To keep it on one side, this whole thing started with a resident complaining that she couldn't get out of her driveway with all the cars parked on the street. So if we take it away from the east side, that'll alleviate her problem, and if we allow parking on the west side, that'll alleviate everybody else's problem. So win-win all the way around.
You talked to Dave and you're good with what
Yep,
he's-
oh yes, yep, David, I've been in contact, talking back and forth, and
All right.
yep, this is
Okay.
excellent.
Did you have somebody to speak to it then, or
If he wants to.
did you want to speak? Sir? You don't have to.
I just-
1 second, if you want to speak, we'll,
Does he need
Can you
to?
fill out a
Suspend
form?
the rules real quick.
yeah. You should fill out a form, but
Yeah.
Okay.
nobody else is speaking here tonight, so we're,
Motion open.
motion made to open the floor. Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Mhm.
I'll just take me longer to write it out than
All right.
who gets
Yeah,
this?
just give it to Dave there.
Dan?
My name was Dan Becker. I live at 626 Roman, and I guess I'm here just to kind of back up what Randy was saying about the parking. When we got the signs up on both sides, nobody knew anything about it. It was, I guess, kind of surprising you know, you live on 2 blocks long where we're getting no parking, it's a 4-block long street. And like most of the north-south streets on the west side, none of them really go anywhere. They all get cut off after so many blocks, other than some of the major ones, so. I have noticed since they've got the no parking on both sides, the speed has increased because they've got a wide open street now. And that's somewhat of an issue, a little bit, you know, residential wise. It's just more of an inconvenience right now, not being able to park. I haven't lived there, but that's my parents' home from 1960 till now, so I kind of know the neighborhood now. You know, it's never been really a problem. It has been as of like this winter, but there were a lot of streets where the streets were narrow because of the snow thing. But I do think it will be better with no parking on one side of the street. It will help a lot with traffic, so. And I guess that's all.
Okay, all right, thank you for your
Other
comments.
than-
Thanks for coming.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't think we have anybody else to speak to that item, so I'll entertain a motion. Motion made, to close the floor, back to regular business, second.
Mr. Chairman,
You second that?
oh, no.
I did.
Okay, all right, got it, all right. Go ahead, Dan.
It seems that everybody's in pretty much agreement with the staff recommendation. I would move, can I just move the staff recommendation be approved?
Yep.
Okay, so that's my motion.
Okay, motion been made, do I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. 2, consideration with possible action request relevant Stoyer to review the lighting and signage of the St. Mary Hospital corridor. Postponed from the previous May meeting.
Yes, we still are not in receipt of a final traffic impact analysis from the developer's consultant. So I guess there's a couple different options at this point in time. We can continue to postpone the item, or we can receive and place it on file. I believe Alderman Stoyer, we've discussed this, and I believe you were more recommending the second option. And if you wanted to bring it back, you could always place another request in.
I mean, we can bring it back, but it's just, hello, everybody. Yeah, Dave and I have talked about this a little bit. I mean, we have a clinic that's being built on that corner. It's a very busy corner to begin with. It's over on Taylor and Shawano. So the request by some of the neighbors was just to look at that entire area for signage and such, but traffic flow as well. And the thing is, it's anticipated. You're anticipating the amount of traffic that may be there. So we've been waiting patiently for this report, and you know, just we want to be good neighbors with them and vice versa. You know, I think it's important that information be shared. So I'm just waiting for that. So either way, I don't know. Receive and place on file, I suppose. I guess I don't know. I mean, it will come back.
That's probably the most appropriate, and you know what I've maintained all along is that I think that this report is going to address the concerns of the neighbors. You know, they want to find out what kind of traffic is going to be generated by the development, where the driveway access points are, and this report's going to have all of that information. So once it becomes available, I mean, this will be something that can be shared with the neighbors.
I guess one question I have is when you do a traffic study, I mean, there's anticipated traffic, but, you know, once the development's in place, then there'll be a different number, I would think. So is that something that, over time, that's something that is looked at, or is that just, would have to be requested at a future time?
It would have to be requested at future. It's not like we do a follow-up
No,
to see how accurate those numbers. The numbers are usually, I mean, they're close enough to get you in the level of service ballpark, and that's typically what people want to know.
Okay, that's good for me. I'll just stay up there because I got another item.
I don't know, we're gonna leave you sit down and walk back up.
Yeah,
Okay, let's, your motion, item number 2 then?
Motion to receive and place on file.
Second. Motion made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. 3, initial request, consideration of possible action on request by Alderman Stoyer to look at the feasibility of left turn caution arrows along Military Avenue traffic signals between Shawano Avenue and Mason Street.
I'll let the elder go up since he's already there.
Okay.
all right. Yeah. Well, this has been interesting. I've met with Dave a number of times, and I've actually gone out with citizens, and we've actually driven up and down Military Avenue. And of course, we're all familiar with the project that they were looking at roundabouts at one time. Well, that didn't work out, so now we have the traffic signals. So what we've found over time, traveling up and down Military, because it gets pretty busy, and Shawano and Military, and then Mason and Military seem to be the two really busy intersections. So I think last year I had talked to Dave about looking at the possibility of, if you got green and you're moving back north and south, to have yellow caution arrows on so that you can turn instead of waiting at a red light. You know, that was one thing, but I think I do understand a little bit of where you're coming from, because it's separated by an island. So, you know, we're just looking for fluidity of traffic, I guess. And I don't know what that may take, but Dave was mentioning something today to me about that some of those signals on Mason Street, basically from 12th all the way up to Mitchell, past Military, are going to be redone. So there's going to be, I think some of that may be dealt with there. And I guess I just wait to hear from you on that.
Right. Yeah, I secured a grant for reconstructing all the traffic signals on West Mason Street, basically from the Fox to 41. And as part of that, the Military Avenue signal will get some modifications done to it. As we know, it's a relatively newer signal. You know, it's got newer technology, built in 2010. At the time, flashing yellow arrow, that's the caution arrows that the elder is referring to. Flashing yellow arrow was not an adopted practice by the Federal Highway Administration. It wasn't allowed. It was more of an experiment at that time. Since the construction of Military Avenue, it has been approved, and you've seen them at a number of intersections in the city of Green Bay, in our surrounding metropolitan area. And the flashing yellow arrow, it's really no different than when you would see a green arrow, yellow arrow, and then all of a sudden you just get the circular green, and if you wanted to take a left, you can permissively take a left once there's a gap. Flashing yellow arrow is really no different than that. All it is just, it's a reminder to the left turning motorist to just use caution while making that turn, rather than thinking that with the green ball indication that they may have the right of way. You know, that was the whole reason for introducing flashing yellow arrow. Now, the two intersections that were mentioned, Shawano Avenue and Mason Street, those two intersections of Military, have what we call protected only left turns on Military Avenue. They're dual left turn lanes, higher volume, higher capacity, and again, at the time, the practice in the industry was to use protected only left turns because of the nature of the dual left turn. You went with the dual left turn, you had to go with the green, yellow, red arrow. You couldn't do the flashing yellow, it wasn't available. You couldn't just go with the solid green ball based off of site issues and some other things like that. And it's mainly, you know, during the busy peak times, it gets just to be a little bit more of a dangerous turn. There's been some changes in what our industry does now, just based off of the advent of flashing yellow arrow and the experiences that have been seen nationwide. And now there is some practice now of going protected only, meaning keeping it the way it is right now during the busier times, but once the traffic volumes start to drop and the gaps start to get bigger, the traffic volume, you know, it's just much easier to take a left turn, we would have the option of using a flashing yellow arrow. So as part of this West Mason project, I'm actually building that into that intersection where we're going to be switching out those heads to the 4-section heads during the peak hours, running it like it is now, and then once the traffic volumes go down, we're actually going to start using the flashing yellow arrow on those movements. So that'll be the significant change at that intersection. Other than that, it pretty much is going to stay the same. Now, the other intersection that he had mentioned was Shawano Avenue. They're very similar in design. Now, that part, or that intersection, is not inclusive of this project that we're doing this year. However, it's on my radar for improvements, probably for a future traffic signal repair program. just to make them similar. You know, we have two intersections that are very similar in design. They're not all that far apart from each other. So it's actually going to be part of our future work to make that conversion similar to what we're doing in West Mason Street.
Okay, I know we had talked about that. I guess, I was wondering, on Military Avenue, you know, I don't know if you do it for that road or for other roads too, but is there some kind of a report or study talking about, let's say if you're driving from Bond all the way down toward Lombardi, as far as times of the day, traffic? The reason I bring that up is, for example, when you're turning left, as you're going south on Military and you come up to Mason and you want to make a left-hand turn and go east, the green arrow there lasts like 4 seconds, or 5 maybe. You might get 2 or 3 cars out. So I guess, Dave, what I'm asking is, you know, just to keep the flow going, you know, I think some of the neighbors get frustrated with that, and it's more or less just to look at each of these intersections and make sure that things are being done in a timely and efficient manner. I think most folks would be good with that. But I'm just wondering, is there anything that was done on Military Avenue that actually talks about the travel times and between lights and such? Is there something, some animal
Yes.
like that?
Yes, well, back in 2009, 2010, we did a citywide retiming. That was pretty much every signal was evaluated and retimed based off of current traffic volumes. Back in, I think it was 16 or 17, that I combined 2 systems. I combined the West Mason system and I combined the Military Avenue system. In essence, because of the intersections such as Mason Military, there's a lot of traffic that go from, you know, one street to the other. So I thought it best to combine the systems to get some sort of coordination, not only along each of the corridors, but to get some predictability between the two. So there was actually a retiming project on that, so it's really not all that long ago. You're right, I mean, I have actually heard some similar complaints to what you said about the southbound to eastbound left turn. That the splits are a little bit higher than you described, and they are flexible and variable based off the amount of traffic, so the more traffic that's there, you know, it will give it a longer time. What we do find at some of these locations, though, is that if that headway gets to be a little bit too long, the signal does what we call gap out, as in, if the traffic doesn't continue to flow, the signal just thinks that, okay, well, the traffic's done flowing. So a lot of times it's, I hate to say it, but it's a lot of times this is the problem. People are on their phones and they're being lazy, and then all of a sudden the signal just times out because they weren't paying
Well,
attention.
there's a degree of that, but I've noticed that there are maybe 5, 6 cars, and 2 or 3 can get through, and then the last 2 have to wait. So it's just like, you know, part of it is, let's get the flow going, open that up, and then, also when people stop in intersections, you know, is that still an issue where they block the signal? You know, let's say if you
Not
pull.
as much.
Not as much?
Yeah,
Okay.
we went through quite a bit of discussion. I think we did some enforcement maybe on it, and then some signage as well, so.
Mhm.
Can't say that the problem is gone away 100%, you know, every time I'm out at the signal, I do see it happen. But I think it's been significantly reduced from when it first opened.
Well, I think for myself and some of the neighbors, we're just looking for continuity and fluidity and all that good stuff. So that's really the reason we brought it up. And, you know, I agree with you in the sense that, you know, if traffic isn't quite as heavy, that, you know, maybe we can have those gaps and you can do some of that. But,
Well, with this new project, this West Mason project, because of the nature of the change, it's a pretty significant change in what we're doing with the
Right.
controllers. A retiming is going to be done anyway.
right.
So not only will Mason Military be retimed, but everything else along that area will be retimed.
What's the time frame roughly on that?
This is probably looking at about starting as early as late August. Yeah, our pole delivery got a little bit delayed because of some issues at the factory and everything like that. And then the turnaround is usually a little bit longer anyway on those.
So it'll be this year, early next year?
It'll be this year.
This year, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good.
Night, good for the night?
I'm good for now.
Okay.
Well, I gotta go upstairs now, that's another story.
Your motion, item 3 then? We'll receive that and place that in file, Dave? or-
I would think so, just for the simple fact that we're already doing projects, so,
Okay.
I mean, the request is going to be addressed.
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman, I would move that we receive and place on file item number 3.
Motion been made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Initial requests, number 4, consideration with possible action on request by Alderman Nicholson to change a two-way yield condition on Juniper Drive at Laura Street to a two-way stop condition.
I'll show you an image of the intersection here, just to give you some context. Here's the East River, here's Main Street. Just a standard typical residential intersection. You have a T intersection to the north, fronting up to this park. The yield condition is actually on Juniper, so you have a yield here and a yield here, while Laura Street, which is a 3-block road, cul-de-sacs at the south end, is the through movement in this case. I did shoot some photos of the intersection that I can show you. So first intersection here, as long as you see it, I guess. This would be looking eastbound at the intersection, approaching it. So here's the yield sign. As you can see, it's pretty wide open. Let me see if I can use something else to open this with. Photos. There we go. So this is coming up to that yield sign and then looking to the south. So as you can see, this is nice and wide open. You've got great sight lines. Next one. This is looking again here towards the park, here towards the school. You can see clearly to the intersection. Again, no sight problems. Looking westbound at the intersection. Again, you can see open sight lines.
Is there any advantage to going to a stop sign there? I mean, this is wide open.
Right, well, I wanted to show you the pictures and then just a few other bits of information. As I do on all of these, I look at the 5-year crash history. I did not find a single crash that occurred at the intersection. Again, it's in a very low volume area. I'm familiar with the area myself, as I would think you are too, Dan. You know, we got a T intersection in the north, like I said, a couple of intersections to the south, the cul-de-sacs. To me, I think actually a two-way yield is the appropriate sign for the conditions, for the sites and everything. That I could see if there was, you know, some obstructions, crashes or something like that. We don't have anything like that.
Is
So,
there any
Mr.
input
Chairman.
from the alderman on it?
what's that?
Any input from the alderman on who's requesting?
No, I
or-
talked to him briefly about it. He just said that he had some constituents that were concerned about it, that wanted it brought up to the traffic commission. So that was, we really seem to have an opinion on it.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
would move to receive and place on file.
Okay, motion made, and a second? Second. Motion made and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. 5, initial request, consideration with possible action to address chronic complaints regarding speeding on 12th Avenue.
Okay. I don't have much to share on this other than just a few facts on the road. So here's a map showing 12th Avenue. Kind of hard to see maybe on here. And north is actually to the right. So its southern terminus is Lombardi Avenue. Its northern terminus is Shawano Avenue. And for traffic, we got about 1,500 vehicles to 3,900 vehicles per day. So this southern end of it is a little bit more residential. That's probably where you're gonna have the lower volumes, and I think the closer you get to Mason Street, and then probably between Mason and Shawano's where you see those numbers go up in volume. Basically, we have the pickle factory here that sees some truck traffic. So the width of the road varies. It's for the most part, a majority of the length, it's about 40-foot clear roadway width. Down in the southern area, it's about 34 feet. Total length of that segment is 1.7 miles. And for a majority of the road, it has a parking lane. So it's one lane of traffic in each direction and a parking lane. There's various no parking here at the corners and some areas of restricted parking, but more in the neighborhood areas and everything, parking is available. So, more in the southern end, it's a little bit more relaxed. But other than that, I really don't have anything else to really add.
Okay. Alden, do you want to speak to your item?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioners. So we're here mostly because, and I have a resident in the district here who'd like to speak on this afterwards as well, but while I think I receive a lot of complaints along that stretch of 12th, I mean, it's a wide open street, very little to block it or slow down traffic in terms of stop signs or yield signs. So, I mean, when you have long stretches, it obviously gives people an opportunity to speed up. And so I think, there's a fair amount of complaints that I receive on the southern end of 12th Avenue. But in particular, and I should have provided more clarity around this, Dave, I apologize. My concern mostly tonight does lie with the area between the Pickle Factory Railroad tracks and Shawano Avenue. I was here, I believe, about a year ago and submitted a request, and we had a different resident in the district that here and spoke on the issue as well. And if I'm not mistaken, I think we put out some speed boards. I wasn't sure what the outcome of that was. And I know that I've, during this period of time over the past year, I've met with Lieutenant Strouf and his team, and we've talked about some enforcement issues. But I think this area in particular continues to be of great concern by the residents in that area, because again, you have a wide open street. There's not enough to slow it down. We explored some things like stop signs and yield signs, which apparently don't meet the traffic, federal traffic codes or regulations on that front. So I'm looking to the commission and perhaps law enforcement to really try to help us figure out what kind of solutions we might have here. I think what perhaps might be compounding the problem in this case is the proximity to the high school. I'm sure any one of you can remember back to your high school days and your disobedience for the law, maybe a little bit. But I think it's one of those things when you think about the demographic that's using that road, folks that live in that neighborhood. We're trying to be consider the safety of the families that are in that area, and still recognizing that we do have some challenges ahead there. And I think rather than just saying, the federal law doesn't allow us to do this or that, I guess I'm just looking to you folks and staff to really help provide some alternative solutions that might work for that area, so that we can reduce the number of complaints and speeding incidents over there. Happy to take any questions if you have any.
I have one question. Has the neighborhood thought about doing one of those calming requests for traffic calming?
I am not familiar with this, so.
Okay. Dave, do you want to?
Is there?
We do have the process.
Process, something you're talking about?
Yeah, that's been in place for a number of years. However, collector roads are not eligible.
Is that?
Collectors and arterials are not
collectors
eligible
aren't.
for the program based off the number of, the volume and speed and everything. I mean, I had said, was it 1,500, 3,900 vehicles? It's a lot of traffic for, putting in speed humps on a road. That's more for like a residential street or an alleyway or something like that. That's not for a road that carries this kind of traffic. These types of roads are, on emergency roads, you get a lot of bus traffic, you may have fire trucks and police vehicles that use it, and that's usually the reason why we don't, or that it was excluded from the program from its onset.
Is there anything that we can do from a physical standpoint, engineering standpoint, to cut down on speeding?
Maybe
Or is this strictly-
if I may suggest, perhaps maybe hearing from the resident that we do have here as well,
Okay.
before deliberating what some possible options might be. That way he might be able to contribute
Sure.
more to your
Yeah.
discussion. So.
Just have him fill out a form. I don't think, he just came in a few minutes ago. The gentleman wants to speak.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the form right there.
Yeah,
Just give him
I'll get you a
if
form
would,
before
please.
you-
Once he fills
Should I
that out.
grab it?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah, like-
While we do that, while he
Yeah.
fills that out, we can suspend the rules.
Motion to open the floor.
Second.
Motion made, second. All in favor?
Right.
Motion carries.
Maybe while he fills it out, I would just also add, if this was just one isolated incident, I wouldn't be here before you. I mean, honestly, I get isolated incidents all the time. But this is a scenario where I've received a high volume of calls from residents in this area, and that's why I'm bringing it to you, asking to help identify solutions. So I just at least wanted to create that point of clarity for you.
Sure.
Mhm.
Brad, did you have any luck with enforcement out there, or is there speed board potential out there?
We deployed speed boards on both
there's
sides,
this-
both
there's
northbound
one.
and southbound, last year, probably about this time of year, if I recall correctly.
Uh-huh.
We had positive results, which we oftentimes do with speed boards initially. But at some point, the speed boards just lose their effectiveness. That's why you don't see any, I don't think, Dave, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any permanent speed boards in the city of Green Bay, partly for that reason.
Okay.
That being said, we also incorporated some enforcement. I have 2 full-time traffic enforcement officers, along with a group, a contingency of community police officers, some specifically assigned to that neighborhood. All of them were asked to utilize their discretionary time, specifically on 12. There were some speeding violations. Some of these complaints, for sure, if not all, are legitimate. I don't contest that. I don't know, and this isn't my wheelhouse as much as Dave's, if there's anything that can be done or not, but from an enforcement perspective, it's a busy street, especially given the surrounding streets, the streets directly to the east and west that also run both north and south. I don't have the numbers, but I can imagine the volume is a third, a quarter, an eighth, who knows? And I think that is just part of the problem, is there's just a lot of traffic on 12th right now. I'm not opposed to assigning more enforcement there without sounding like I'm making excuses. As the Alder probably is aware, I get a lot of requests for traffic enforcement throughout the city of Green Bay, so I try to utilize the limited resources I have to the best of my ability. Certainly doesn't mean that we can't spend more time here. My experience with this has been, we're good for a while if we do hit it hard, but when we leave and we move on to enforcement in other parts of the city, the violations, in this case probably speeding, will probably pick up again. As much as anybody, I'm interested to hear from the resident, see what suggestions he may have, and certainly open to discussion.
Thank you. You got the name and the address then? You're good, okay. All right, go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Gregory Hale, 922 Howard Street. Thank you for your time. Bought the property back in October of 2016 from Todd and Chris Taylor. They resided there for about 30 years. The neighbor to the south of me, Barb, I can't for the life of me remember her last name, her and her husband lived there just as long as Tony and Chris Taylor did. And the speeding has been an issue on that street from ever since they can remember when. What I personally experienced, last year I called and left a couple of messages on traffic enforcement's answering machine about speeding and one vehicle, a Chrysler 300, a black one. I mean, I'm pretty good judge a speed probably over 100 miles an hour from Shawano to the corner of 12th and Howard. I have a 9-year-old daughter and I have a 17-month-old boy, and I have a fully fenced perimeter around my property. Daughter has a scooter, and I would like for her to be able to utilize the sidewalk in safety. And I understand you guys are also in a rock and hard place to try to utilize what sources you have available to you guys. It scares me. It really does. Like, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have 2 big old telephone poles on the corner protecting my property if there's an accident, but nobody else does. And for all the neighbors I've been able to meet and introduce myself to, even on all the adjacent blocks and that intersection, that needs to be addressed big time. It's a scary situation, and I love Green Bay. I moved here in '89, and I don't really, I guess, know what else to say besides it needs to be something that's addressed a little bit more. There has been enforcement there, which we see and we greatly appreciate. Canadian National, I happen to have a friend who's an electrician with Canadian National, and they have their officer out there. I don't know, is that in junction with something with the Green Bay Police Department?
They patrol the railroad property primarily.
And I spoke with that officer, and his presence been more known on the tracks on the adjacent streets as well too. He'll float from all of them, and I see him pull people over all the time. Probably more so Canadian National than I do the Green Bay Police Department. So I guess with that being said, in addition, I don't know why anybody would want to speed down that street with with it being in such disrepair. So I would like to, for the safety of everybody, see something happen there. I know you mentioned, I'm not sure the term you used, where you put the speed bumps in. What's that called?
Speed bumps.
Just the speed bumps, okay. Good calming.
Yeah, traffic calming, yeah.
Is there a way you could put, like, you know, the, on the highway you have those rumble strips? Is there a way that there's something that can go on there that would make more noise if you're going faster than you're supposed to be? Has it ever been looked into?
I don't know, it'd be more of an in, Dave. I don't know if that's something,
Rumble strips are typically something you find on a rural roadway. You'll find them in two different locations, on a center line or on an edge line. And that's typically in areas where you find people having runoff road accidents. I've never heard it being used as a traffic calming tool. I think I know where you're getting at, but I can also tell you that the first people that are going to complain about something like that are the people that are living right next to them. As in, they hear that noise all the time, they're going to be, they'll be going crazy. The reason I say that is a past life before working here at the city, I had actually worked on a number of removals of the rumble strips prior to multi-way stops, like in rural areas, you know, how you see it and you're out in the middle of nowhere and you have a four-way stop, and of course, you know, people aren't stopping them, so what do? They put in those advance warning rumble strips just to, you know, wake up drivers, whatever, you know. And there was a huge backlash against that just from people that live by them because they could not stand the noise. So, you know, do I think it could work? I mean, it would work if someone's veering off, but if they're staying in the lane, it's not going to make a
Well,
sound.
you made a good point, though, as far as, I mean, even at night, too, around bar close, I mean, just motorcycles, just like a bullet down the road. I mean, loud mufflers, a lot of loud mufflers, too.
you get that throughout the city though, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know.
Like your
I-
neighborhood, that's just a summer ritual, it seems like, to
Yeah.
with the motorcycles.
Yeah,
Question for you, are you noticing a certain time? We talked about maybe the high school students, but is that,
not necessarily around that time, but definitely for the safety of them. I would think with them crossing the road and as long as they know how to use crosswalks and not just jetting out in the middle of the cars. More in the morning, more at night, like 8 a.m., 4 to 6 p.m. But I mean, it's throughout the day. It's throughout the day. It really is. The LED signs, though, that that had been put up worked excellent. I think that was a really good focal point for people, that if they were speeding, you know, that they saw that they were and it was flashing at them. I even mentioned to our aldermen that you know, is there a way we can get some funding and buy these signs and have them as a permanent fix on that road. Selling Cerrugi candy bars, whatever. I mean, I was really, I mean, all the neighbors too collectively. I mean, I can speak on their behalf because they couldn't be here. I was able to speak with 4 of my neighbors, and they just couldn't make it, eating dinner or taking care of kids. But I think that would be a good way to address it off the bat if the manpower is not there to physically sit on the street and watch.
All right, thank you for your comments.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
your time. Thank you.
Motion back to regular business.
second?
Second, all in favor? Back to normal business. Anybody, any thoughts or comments here?
Well, I guess I would get back to where I was going before, and that is a question to Dave. Is there anything that we could do from a physical standpoint on this situation, or is this strictly law enforcement?
Yeah, collectors are a tricky, you know, they're kind of like an in-between, you know, it's an arterial where usually you got free flow speeds, not as many driveways, conflict points, you know, and these collectors are more kind of an in-between where you do have usually a higher mix of residential, but then you have the higher volume of traffic. So, like I had said, relative to the neighborhood traffic calming program, these type of roads are typically not inclusive of those sorts of treatments. When I say treatments, I'm talking about the speed humps, the speed tables, chicanes, road narrowing, but these are also very pricey things to do. I mean, the bottom line when it comes down to slowing people down from an engineering perspective is to make them feel constrained. It's a narrowness feeling. Well, we all know, I mean, and maybe, I know we were talking about Vroman Street and, you know, that fact that now that you don't have parked cars on it, it feels wider, people are driving it faster. They were feeling constrained before, and actually having parked vehicles on a street is one of our tools in our toolbox for traffic calming. The narrower that it feels to the motorist, the slower that they drive naturally. I don't think you're ever going to address through engineering measures the 5% of drivers that are going to speed through like a rocket. Those kind of drivers, there's really, in my opinion, there's nothing that you can do. They're gonna do whatever they want to do regardless of what you put out. They blow stop signs, they blow traffic signal indications, they don't care what the posted speed limit, they're gonna do what they do. That's a very small percentage, but that percentage is still out there. That's my belief, after decades of doing this job. But when it comes down to it, it's all about effectively making the motors feel like they're constrained. That's what's gonna slow them down without police enforcement.
Would striping work out there, Dave? I mean, haven't we done that in a few other streets in the city where, I mean, the white stripes, for, as you say, it kind of narrows it down a little bit so they don't get the
Yep.
perception going a little slower, maybe, I don't know, is that?
Right, I think there was one comment that I heard from Gregory, which was that the condition of the road was maybe not all that great. That being said, we have done retrofits with like bike lanes, and I believe actually as part of our up and coming, hopefully approved by the Common Council citywide bike ped plan, I believe 12 is actually in there for addition of bike lanes. I don't want to say that with 100% confidence, but I believe that is one of them. Because there's a lot of streets of that character and nature where it's just because of the connectivity that these streets bring, that they're also natural bike paths as well. So yes, you are correct. When you have, when in roadways that have typically 10-foot travel lanes, you will see that reduction. I know we did it on Salt Point, West Point, and although I don't think those numbers went down to the point that was desirable, there was a market effect that where it was reduced. The 85th percentile did go down.
It's a baby step in the right
And
direction.
it was a baby step in the right direction, and I think, you know, it's kind of a win-win situation. You're helping the bike ped community, you're also reducing speeds, which is good for the neighborhood. So, I mean, I think that bike lanes are actually a very good retrofit. However, in order to retrofit them, you have to have what I would say a clean pavement to start working with. We were fortunate enough on those two streets where the pavement condition was in good shape. You have to look for things like joint lines and everything, because the bicyclists, you have to think and empathize as a bicyclist on what sort of lane are you providing them. You also have to think about roadway width, and if you've got issues with opening and closing of doors from cars that are parked in the street and people that are entering and exiting them. You know, in areas like I think what we did on the west side where there was not as much, and still to this day is not as much on-street parking activity, that actually helps because you don't have that open door zone conflict area. I'm not exactly sure on how much parking activity takes place on 12th. I've driven it a number of times. I don't really recall seeing a lot, if any, vehicles parked. And I believe that there may actually be more restrictions on street parking in this area than I believe you're bringing up. So, that being said, I mean, this might be one of those situations you look at it and say, if we've got enough roadway width and we have restricted parking for whatever reason, if we just say, lose the restriction, but people park on the street, that actually might have a positive effect on reducing speeds. It actually works a lot better than you think.
May I say something really quick? I would, do you mind if I address?
Motion to open the floor.
Second.
I don't think you ever
Me,
closed it,
second.
did you?
Yeah, we
All in
closed.
favor?
Yeah.
Go ahead, sir.
I just, as far as commenting, I would love to bike down that road. I've seen so many people below that stop sign by my house, and just the slow and goes. in doing that, it would create more of a blind spot, I think. It would be dangerous. I almost want to put a camera up at my house and bring it to a meeting and show you how many people go through that. It's a daily occurrence.
Let me ask just a question now that you're back open. Do you feel it's a lot of people who do not live in the neighborhood that are going from either Mason to Shawano to Shortcut, or is it a lot of, I mean, typically we find there's a lot of people who live in the neighborhood who are the abusers, just because they're there all the time.
It's a mixer, it really is.
Is it? Okay.
It really is.
Because you had mentioned that there was I thought I heard you had mentioned particular vehicles that maybe were the chronic abusers of this?
Well, one I specified from last year's call, 300 Chrysler doing about 100. But I mean, motorcycles, I could say just from the sound of how fast they go from left to right, I mean, it's 2 to 3 times, 2.5 times the speed what they should be going. Definitely.
Another question for you too. I know with the railroad tracks, that you can see here right by the pickle factory south end of it, there is a stop condition at the tracks. I believe it's even a blinking red beacon on top of that. From your experience, anecdotally, have you seen compliance to that, lack of compliance? You see a lot of people like just blowing that stop sign too?
I would say there's probably about 30% compliance, and for that matter, with the amount of citations that could be written off of just that being blown and speeding, there would be more than enough funds available to fully fund that street up and down. I can guarantee it.
It's a pretty low number.
Every time I go up, I always do left, right. I practice what I preach. Even with the CN officer there too, always left, right, left, like I was told how to drive. Things go by there and they creep up by those trees, and I mean, they're there. If you don't stop, you're gonna get hit.
Is the train activity frequent?
I think it's early morning, and then afternoon. I only see it once in a while, though I usually work it all day.
Right, because I think for as many times as I've been over that crossing, I think I maybe encountered one. So I mean, it's probably, like you were saying, maybe concentrated at certain peaks when they're doing their deliveries or whatever they need to do. But yeah, this is actually what I would say is probably a classic example of why we don't put in unwarranted stop signs, because when people don't see the activity, well, why am I stopping here? Then they roll it, they blow it. And then there's those people that feel that they've been somewhat compromised on their trip, like, why am I stopping? And then that's when they start speeding up after that, because they're trying to make up for lost time. I think that could be part of the problem.
Stop sign on facing my house is plain view. There should be no question.
That's different though. You're talking Howard Street stops. What I'm talking about is when you have a major street such as this, and you have a stop condition that most of the people, I mean, 15 to 3,900 vehicles there, I'm gonna guess that probably 98% of the time, people don't see a train there, if not even higher. 99% of the time, it's not a train. People are stopping and they go, why am I stopping? And then the stop sign ultimately gets abused. I mean, it's just human nature, that's how people are and we drive. So that is, I think, a case in point why we don't put in stop signs for the purpose of speed control, because ultimately people start to abuse them, and then that's when we have problems, especially at cross streets. Luckily, this is just a rail crossing. I mean, obviously you hit a train, that's pretty detrimental, but it's at these roadways where the traffic volume of cars would be much, much higher than the train volume that you see here. And pedestrians crossing, you got sidewalks and everything, that's when it really becomes dangerous, because then everyone thinks that everyone's gonna stop, and all of a sudden they don't, and that's when people get hit.
Those new overhangs that we've been seeing, we see close to the Alloway to Pier entrance, where you press a button, and I mean, it's like 4th of July, it comes on and it's flashing. Maybe during certain times of the day, that is always continuously flashing to show that pedestrians will be crossing, and that might act as a deterrent as well too, to keep people slower. The car idea is wonderful. With the people blowing stop signs, I don't know how safe that's going to be for anybody, including the bicyclists that are out there. So yeah, that's why I ultimately point at law enforcement to see if,
Yeah. I have one other question for you. There's restricted parking out there, I'm not sure why, but if we took the restricted parking away, would you think that'd be a problem? I mean, you're only one of hundred or dozens out in the neighborhood or whatever. I mean, what's your feel for, just as a one person to ask this question to, of taking away the restricted parking? Because if we had cars in the street, that's gonna slow down.
oh, I think that's a good idea. I do. I mean, anything is worth trying. Anything is worth trying. I don't ever park on the street. We always park in the driveway. But I think that anything is better than nothing. So I
Okay.
appreciate you guys entertaining any idea.
Do you
What
know
I'm
why,
s-
Dave, there's a restricted parking on this?
Yeah, what I'm seeing here is 2-hour parking, and that's, what, the 2 hours there probably because of the proximity to West High School. That's very common around high schools. You start to see the 2-hour parking zones basically to keep the kids off the street. I mean, is it really even a problem if the kids would park on the street? It might actually help your speeding problem there if they were in there with their presence. Just a thought.
And I'd be happy to do some door knocking in that area to get a sense from the neighbors what they,
I think that would be a good thing if, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't, the neighbors, I mean, maybe they want it, I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah,
You
it's
got
just
some
kind
type
of
of
one of those
consensus
things
or-
where, you know, it's the pros and the cons. Well, I don't want these kids parking in front. Well, I don't like the speeding. Well, which don't you like? Because we might be able to solve one with the other, you know? Because, again, it's all about, I mean, the studies, the research that's been out there, it's all about how a motorist feels constrained. Is it actually how they naturally drive? And I think that in a situation like this where you got a wide open street, you got limited parking available, so you're seeing limited, low numbers of parked vehicles, you in essence have about a 20-foot travel lane there. Of course you're gonna drive fast. Freeway lanes are only 12 feet. You got 20 feet. You know, it's easy to speed. And if there's not the presence, you know, the halo effect as we call it, when the cops are not present, you know, they have halos on when the cops are there, and as soon as the cops go away, then the halos get taken off and maybe some horns grow.
And that has
So-
been the experience with this street in particular. And I think we talked about when we met, it's when the law enforcement is there, when I'm able to put the resources there, you know, people shape up, they do, they modify their driving behavior. When we initially put the speed boards out, that does have a positive impact, but it's a very short-lived effect. And I know you had mentioned something about selling candy bars for permanent speed boards. While I applaud your efforts if you're truly serious about it, I would caution you against it simply because permanent speed warnings like that, without the presence of law enforcement, generally don't act as a deterrent.
And
You
it's the
spend
same
a lot
thing
of
with
money
the-
for a flashy sign that people won't pay attention to.
Yeah, we did a very detailed study when it came down to Monroe Avenue, when it came down to the drive, we call them driver feedback signs, permanent installations, and talked with other communities that have had them, to find out what their success ratio has been with it. And what we found was that, you know, for example, like there's one on Webster Avenue, not in the city, I think it's Alloway, and it's a little tiny little thing, probably up on a wooden pole, and compliance rate is horrible. What you find is, and this is what I've learned from talking with other communities and other traffic engineers, where they found the success with the driver feedback in a permanent installation is A, what Brad just said, you have to have it in conjunction with police enforcement. And number two, it actually has to be an overhead style, oversized board. Otherwise, the compliance rates are just, they're non-existent, and that fact, that's why we have the trailers for this, because we know that the effect in this time frame is very short. So that's the primary reason, and you know, even with something like Monroe Avenue, ended up not even putting them in. They are quite pricey. Once you start looking at overhead structures, I believe the cost estimate we came up for that one with both directions was like 15 grand. So I mean, it's nothing to sneeze at when it comes down to cost. I mean, would it work? It could, but then again, you know, there would have to be some sort of a enforcement component that goes along with it. I'm talking a frequent basis. You know, everyone's talked about the Rosendale effect, and you know, it would be great if we had the money and resources to create a Rosendale effect here, but that's really just not the reality of how things are funded. You know, you got a small community like that, and you got one major roadway going through there. Yeah, you can do it, but when you have how many lane miles of roads? I mean, hundreds. You know, I mean, we have a lot here to oversee, so it does get more challenging.
All right, thank you, sir. We're gonna go back to regular. Or did you have one question you want to ask, Dan? Did you?
I have a question of Brad.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, do we want to go back into closed session?
Yeah, let's do that first, okay.
There's been a motion.
Just one more comment.
Yep.
And of course, I'll let you guys debate, but maybe what I would suggest is a referral back to staff for two things. One, to give me an opportunity to do some door knocking to determine if the residents would be open to the removal of the no parking signage. But secondly, if we can verify if in fact this particular street is included in that, the new plan that's coming out.
Oh,
Because I do think, the addition of the bike lanes, maybe combined with the parking, on-street parking, might actually create that depth there that we're looking
Yep.
for to slow folks down. And then, of course, Brad, if we can, continue that dialogue about maybe some temporary options, but long-term budgeting options.
Absolutely. Alder,
to give you
I
some
am not
support.
opposed to these, and I hate to call them Band-Aids, it's kind of what they are. I'm not opposed to that because it does help, albeit on a temporary basis. When Dave and I can work together, and that's kind of where the discussions seem to be headed, where he's talking about the street narrowing on top of enforcement, that may become more of a permanent solution.
You're taking 2 of 3 E's right there. You're
Right.
taking the engineering and you're taking the enforcement components of 3 right there. So that actually, when you take and get both of those fulfilled, you will probably likely see a better chance of results.
One
I have
suggestion
a question.
One suggestion I would make before you do the door knocking is maybe talk to Dave about the blinking lights too, because that tends to come up as a solution. And it isn't as effective, or we can't use it all the time. So maybe arm yourself with that knowledge before you go out to.
Now, when you say blinking light as in what?
Well, you had mentioned the
The overheads that were in.
Well, I think what you were talking about was that cross, I believe the reference you were making was on Riverside, where the DOT installed that newer installation. We call it a hawk, or a pedestrian hybrid.
Sure, just before you get to Dairy Queen and here.
Yes.
Yep.
That's yeah. Now, that's a pedestrian hybrid beacon. Now, those are typically used at areas where you'll see a lot of ped crossings. If you don't see any ped crossings there, the thing won't ever go on.
Mhm.
So you kind of
But
defeat
you'd
the
also
purpose.
mentioned maybe if you had it continuous before. So I mean, I just think it'd be good for you to have some of the context before.
By the hospital too, St. Vincent's Hospital when they're.
Right, that's a different type, but that's
Right.
one that's more effective, in my opinion. And, I'll be quite frank with you, anything that's on a timer or that's always flashing, always loses effectiveness over time. Case in point, I wish Randy was still here, was Delsman and Northern, Another one is Grinion and Webster.
Yeah, I used to live there.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And it's like,
coincidence.
okay, it's like,
Craig's
seriously,
gotta go.
people just get desensitized to it. It has to be, the flashing component has to be somehow connected to a ped crossing in order for it to be effective.
So Alder Johnson, if we were to send this back to staff or hold this, how long would you need to come up with additional information from the residents over there?
Next meeting.
So 30 days?
So we just postpone this instead
All
of
right.
giving the staff one, we just postpone it. That means that we can, A, get it on the agenda, and B, in the meantime,
Yeah.
do some.
Well, he made the motion already.
Okay, so we've got a motion, Dave, to go back to regular business
Second.
first of
Okay.
all. Motion made, seconded, so we're back to regular business.
I have one question. Lieutenant,
Yes.
not only do we have a problem with not enough officers, or maybe the ones that aren't assigned for traffic, not doing citations, that's another issue. But I understand from some people that have talked to me because of my position as the chairman of the Green Bay Neighborhood Leadership Council, that there's a real backlog at the courthouse in going after repeat offenders, that there's people out there that have multiple warrants. They don't give a damn if they get more warrants because they know that the court system is not going to process their warrants. They're not going to go after them and fine them. They're not going to confiscate their cars. I mean, there's that aspect to this whole problem. It's just not, issuing citations. It's what do you do after you get the citation? How many people out there, how many warrants out there are multiple warrants that are not being processed through the court system? I I throw that out, I don't know if you have an answer right now. I would like to know that answer as a member of this commission, because I understand that that is a real problem that is not being dealt with.
Well, I don't know that it's a problem necessarily from a law enforcement perspective. I mean, when an officer encounters somebody with an active warrant, whether it's traffic or otherwise, that person's placed under arrest. It's an order from a judge. Now, what the courts or the judge or the commissioners or magistrates do with it after the officer places that person in jail, which is usually the result of that warrant, even for traffic, that's beyond law enforcement control. That falls on the courts, of course.
I know, but could you find out from the court system how many multiple warrants we have out there that are not being processed?
Well, I don't know. They're not being processed, sir, normally because they're not in custody. I think once they're in custody, they are being processed. There's just a lot of warrants out there. I mean, when I show up for traffic court, or when I have Officer Young, who's one of my traffic officers, show up for traffic court, which is every 2 weeks, you know, there's probably about a between 40 and 50% attendance rate. These are criminal traffic offenses. They're crimes. Only about 40% of the people scheduled to appear on a regular basis.
So 60% don't appear.
Correct. And
So what are we doing with that 60%?
Normally, the courts will issue warrants for their arrest. But now, in order for that warrant to be processed, or that person to be held accountable for that warrant, that person has to have law enforcement contact. Well, in order for that person to have law enforcement contact, you normally have to do something to get the attention of law enforcement. And there's all sorts of other things, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, because I know we're kind of running behind, but that warrant has to be entered in a timely fashion by records personnel or clerical
Right.
staff. Now, the courts have to decide to follow up with the warrant. I've seen warrants quashed. A person shows up for court, didn't show up 6 months ago. There's a warrant, active warrant for them in the system. But because they're now in front of the magistrate, instead of penalizing them, the magistrate says, we'll quash that warrant because you're now here. So essentially, they walk around free for 6 months with a warrant hanging over their head. And when they had the opportunity to receive some type of punitive consequences, they don't. It's not a broken system, but it's not a perfect system.
It's pretty broken.
It's
All right.
sprained.
We can debate that. I mean, if you-
I would like to have more information on that, though. Maybe you and I can sit down.
I was gonna say, we should probably have a private conversation.
All right, let's move on here. So, Craig, you got a motion on number
Motion to
5?
hold this until July.
Good, okay. Do I have a second on this motion?
Second.
Motion made, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, motion carries then. We'll see you next month then.
Folks,
Um,
I'll be next day.
Okay, thank you. Next meeting, Monday, July 15th. Anybody know they're not gonna be here in July, vacations or something, or? I know we're kinda short one person. I know, Ray, how long are you gonna be, have you decided yet, or?
The rest of the house.
This is the house, so we're gonna lose Ray at some time here shortly, probably. Dave, and I know we're down one, so I don't know if you're in contact with the mayor.
I have,
Fighting.
my understanding is that they're actively looking.
Okay, all right. Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion been made,
Second.
seconded, all in favor? We're adjourned. Good for another month, Dan.